Can I sit here? That tiny little voice didn't just interrupt the quiet rhythm of the coffee shop. It cracked straight through the routine-heavy morning of a man who hadn't really felt anything real in a long time. Marcus Hale, the widowed CEO who built his grocery and tech empire from the ground up, sat at the far corner table like he always did, shoulders stiff, eyes glued to a laptop he wasn't actually reading, coffee steaming untouched, phone buzzing ignored. The kind of man who looked like he had the world balanced on the end of his pen, yet somehow didn't know where to put his own heart anymore. But this morning, right as the first snowflakes drifted lazily outside the windows, a little girl no taller than his briefcase tugged his sleeve with her mitten-clumsy hand, her cheeks pale, her breath thin, and her teddy bear hanging from one arm like it. Had been through more than most adults he knew. Lily, 4 years old, wearing a mismatched coat, a hat pulled down too far, and eyes that carried this soft exhaustion no kid should ever know. Marcus didn't answer at first. He just stared at her, not in a cold way, but like he was trying to figure out how in the world a kid found him approachable. He wasn't the strangers come say hi type. He was the guy people watched from a distance and whispered, "That's the CEO." But Lily didn't care about titles or suits or boardrooms. She just needed a place to sit. And honestly, she looked like she needed more than that. Warmth, safety, maybe a second to breathe. When she wobbled a little, Marcus's heart kicked hard against his ribs, the same way it used to when he'd see his late wife hold their son on those rough nights, before the accident took them both. So he pushed his laptop aside, slid the chair out with a quiet scrape, and said in that low, steady voice he barely recognized anymore, "Yes, sweetheart, you can sit." Here, he took off his heavy scarf and wrapped it around her shoulders, watching her relax into it like she'd just stepped into the warmest hug she'd felt all morning. She gently placed her teddy bear on the table, smoothed its ears, and whispered, "This is Hope. She's tired, too." And right then, for the first time in years, Marcus felt something loosen inside him, something he thought he'd buried with the grief he never talked about. But before he could process any of that, a young woman dashed toward them, snow still caught in her hair, panic coloring every inch of her face. "Lily," she cried, kneeling fast, pulling the girl close. "Honey, you can't wander off like that." "I'm so sorry. I didn't see her move from the line." Marcus raised his hand, slow and calm, almost instinctively, like he didn't want her to feel embarrassed for a second longer. "She's fine," he said softly. "She just asked to sit." The mother, Emma, nodded, cheeks flushed from both cold and fear, her coat far too thin for the weather, exhaustion tucked behind every word she tried to form. When she lifted Lily, the girl waved a tiny hand over her mother's shoulder and whispered, "Bye-bye, Scarf Man." And even after they walked out the door, even after the bell above the frame stopped ringing, Marcus stayed frozen in place, staring at the steam curling from his coffee, wondering why the world suddenly felt louder, and why a stranger's child had managed to crack a door inside him he swore he'd sealed shut. For a long moment after they left, Marcus just sat there, fingers tapping lightly on the table, staring at the empty chair where Lily had been. The scarf he wrapped around her still held a faint warmth in the air, and it stirred up a memory he didn't expect to feel today. His late wife, Claire, smiling across a hospital bed while holding their son, saying, "Kids don't need perfection. They just need someone who shows up." He swallowed hard, pushing the memory back into the corner of his mind, where he kept all the things that hurt too much to replay. But the thing is, once something cracks your heart, even for a second, it doesn't seal back the same way. And that little girl bundled in a hat too big for her head had cracked him open without even realizing it. The buzz of the coffee shop faded behind him. Cups clinking, baristas calling, out names, all of it. Just a blur as he replayed Lily's tired smile and the way she'd clutched her bear like she was holding the whole world together. With one tiny hand, something about her lingered. Something about the way her mother looked worn down, but still held her close like she'd fight the whole planet if it tried to take her daughter away. Then, as if the universe refused to let him drift back into his emotionally numb routine. The doorbell jingled again, and there they were. Emma, holding Lily tightly, apologizing to the barista for taking too long to gather herself, searching for a table that didn't exist because the shop had filled up. Lily looked pale now, paler than earlier, her little body slumping in her mother's arms in a way that made Marcus's pulse spike. Without thinking, not with logic, not with strategy, not with the kind of calculated calm he used in million-dollar meetings, he stood, walked straight over and said, "She's not okay, is she?" Emma blinked, surprised someone noticed. She gets tired fast," she whispered, brushing a trembling hand across Lily's forehead. "Chemo days are harder. She'll be okay. She just needs to rest." But Marcus had been around enough. Hospital rooms to know that wasn't just fatigue. The little girl's breathing was lighter, her skin too cool, her eyes fighting to stay open. "Sit down," he said gently, pulling out a chair before Emma could argue. "Please, let her breathe for a second." Emma hesitated, unsure if she should trust a stranger in a suit, unsure if pride or exhaustion should lead the moment, but she finally sank into the chair, Lily curled against her shoulder, Hope the teddy bear hanging loose at her side. And while snow drifted outside, while steam fogged the windows, Marcus Hale, the widowed CEO who hadn't let himself care about much of anything in years, realized that this wasn't just some coffee shop moment. This wasn't a passing interaction he'd forget. The universe had shoved this child right into his path like it. Wanted to see what he'd do with something that wasn't listed on any corporate agenda. He didn't know how yet, didn't know what door it would open or what part of his life it would rewrite. But he felt it, that faint, undeniable tug of purpose. Something was about to change, and it all started with a sick little girl who looked up at him and whispered, "Can I sit here?" The thing about moments like this, those small, fragile seconds when a kid leans too heavily into her mother's shoulder, is that they don't just tug at your heart, they yank it awake like someone flipped a switch inside your chest. And Marcus felt that switch flip the second he watched Lily slump against Emma, her breath coming out soft and uneven, her tiny fingers curling around. Hope the teddy bear as if she needed to hold on to something solid just to stay upright. The coffee shop noise faded to a distant hum, like the whole world had stepped 10 feet away and left the three of them in their own quiet bubble. "She needs a minute," Emma whispered, her voice thin, worn, one of those voices that belonged to someone who'd had far too many long nights and far too few breaks. "Chemo days. They just hit her harder sometimes." She forced a shaky smile, but it didn't fool Marcus. He'd seen that same look on his wife's face years ago, the exhausted half-smile you give when you want someone to believe you're fine, even when you're hanging on by a thread. Marcus pulled a chair closer, lowering his tone as he said, "Does she need anything? Water? Something sugary? A warm drink?" But Emma shook her head. "We're okay," she said automatically, the same way people say they're fine even when they're drowning. Her coat sleeves were frayed, her boots worn down at the soles, and the bag slung over her shoulder looked like it had been stitched back together more times than she could count. She wasn't just tired, she was overwhelmed. Trying to hold up her job, the treatments, the bills, the world. Lily shifted weakly, muttering something into her mom's neck, and Marcus saw it. The way Emma's hand trembled slightly as she stroked her daughter's back, the way she blinked away panic, like she had trained herself never to show fear in front of her child. "I'm sorry," Emma murmured suddenly, shaking her head like she'd broken some unwritten rule. I shouldn't dump this on a stranger. We're getting through, one day at a time." But Marcus wasn't the kind of stranger who turned away from a mess. Not now, not ever again. Not after losing his own family and realizing too late that he'd focused on everything, except the people who needed him most. He leaned forward, lowering his voice even more, making it warm, steady, the kind of tone that carried no judgment, only concern. "You're not dumping anything," he said. "You're a mom doing everything you can. There's no apology in that." And for the first time, Emma met his eyes in a way that wasn't guarded or rushed or full of polite distance. It was honest, raw, vulnerable, like she'd been holding her breath for months and this random man in a coffee Shop had finally given her a second to inhale. Outside, the snow thickened, dusting the street with a soft white blanket that made the whole world feel slower, quieter, more delicate, and somehow, without either of them saying it outright, Marcus understood that he was sitting at the edge of something important, something bigger than coffee and scarves and polite conversation, something that had its roots in pain, but also in possibility. A few minutes passed, and Lily slowly blinked her eyes open, looking up at Marcus with that same faint, weary curiosity she'd had the first time she approached him. Marcus offered her a tiny smile, the soft, patient kind he never used in boardrooms, and she whispered, "Hi, Scarf Man," with a voice so small it felt like it might blow away if the heater kicked on too hard. He chuckled, but gently, making sure the laugh didn't overwhelm her. Emma brushed a hand across Lily's forehead and whispered, "Baby, you scared me." Lily just nodded, too tired to do much else, and that's when it hit. Marcus. This wasn't a family barely getting by. This was a family barely staying above water, the kind who had learned how to survive on grit and hope, but not much else. "We should probably get her home," Emma murmured, trying to stand, adjusting her bag like she was preparing to carry the weight of 2 lives on, shoulders already worn thin. But before she could take a single step, Lily's breath quickened, a shaky inhale, then a weak little cough that made her whole body fold in on itself. Marcus didn't think. He just moved. "Hold on," he said, steady but urgent. He grabbed his coat and stepped beside them, supporting Lily's back with a careful hand so Emma didn't have to manage everything alone. "Let me drive you," he offered. Emma froze, the tension in her shoulders tightening like a pulled cord. No, I can't ask you to do that," she whispered. "You didn't ask," he replied softly. "I'm offering." She hesitated, torn between pride and fear, and the harsh reality that she couldn't walk far in her daughter's condition. But one look at Lily's pale face made the decision for her. She nodded almost too quietly to hear. "Okay," she whispered. They stepped out into the cold, the wind cutting sharper than before, snow swirling around them like the sky was exhaling. Marcus shifted his scarf around Lily again, tightening it gently so the wind wouldn't reach her chest. Emma wrapped her arms around her daughter, her footsteps slow, careful, almost shaky. Marcus walked beside them, shielding them from the wind without even thinking about it. At his car, he opened the back door and let Emma settle Lily into the seat, her small hands clutching hope with whatever strength she still had. When Emma closed the door, she leaned against the frame for a second, breathing like she hadn't had one good breath all morning. Marcus stood there watching her, realizing that this wasn't just about one ride or one moment or one cold winter morning. This was the universe handing him a second chance, a chance to show up for someone who needed support before life crushed her under the weight of doing everything alone. And as he walked around to the driver's side, snow coating his shoulders, engine humming to life, he couldn't shake the thought ringing loud in his mind. This isn't the last time I'll help them. Something had started today. Something he didn't yet have a name for, but something he knew he wasn't walking away from. There's a strange kind of quiet that fills a car. When a child is fighting sleep and a mother is fighting panic, and Marcus felt that quiet settle around them, like a soft fog as he drove through the snowy streets. Lily's breathing steadied a little, but every small whimper she let out hit him like a needle in his chest. Emma kept one hand on her daughter's leg, rubbing gentle circles through the blanket Marcus had passed back. Her other hand clutched the seatbelt so tight her knuckles turned pale. "She'll be okay," Marcus said softly, eyes still on the road, voice steady not because he was calm, but because he needed her to feel safe. Emma nodded, but her eyes were glossy, her lip trembling in the faint reflection of the dashboard lights. It's just been a long week," she whispered, her voice almost cracking. "Bills, shifts, treatments. It piles up fast, and Marcus, who spent his days juggling numbers worth millions, found himself realizing he had never faced a weight like that. Not this kind. Not the slow grind that squeezes a parent from every direction at once. They pulled into the clinic's parking lot, tires crunching over snow that hadn't been cleared yet, and Marcus hopped out before Emma's door even fully opened. He helped her lift Lily, wrapping his coat around the little girl again, blocking the wind with his body as if instinct alone taught him to protect her. Inside, nurses rushed to check Lily's vitals, and Marcus stepped back just enough to give space, but stayed close enough that Emma could see he wasn't going anywhere. Minutes felt like hours before a nurse gave a reassuring nod. She's stable, just exhausted. She needs rest, hydration, and a calm day. Emma exhaled like she'd been underwater too long. She brushed Lily's hair back and kissed her forehead, whispering something only a terrified mother could say with that mix of relief and heartbreak. When they left the clinic, something had shifted. Not in some dramatic, movie-style moment, but in that quiet, steady way a door opens when both people push it from the same side. Marcus walked them to his car with the same protective calm. But inside, he was a storm. He'd seen the sheer exhaustion in Emma's shoulders, the overwhelming fear tucked behind her smile, the way she tried to carry everything, because life had never given her the luxury of asking for help. And he kept replaying the same thought. This didn't have to be this hard. Not for her. Not for his own employees. Not for anyone working 2 or 3 jobs just to stay standing. When he dropped them at their apartment, a small walk-up with flickering hallway, lights and a front door that stuck. Emma tried to thank him, her voice catching on every other word. Marcus didn't let her finish. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently. Lily sleepily waved from her mother's arms, whispering, "Bye, Scarf Man," before drifting against her mom's shoulder. Marcus watched them climb the stairs, watched Emma unlock the door with a tired arm, watched the hallway light flicker above her head like it was deciding whether to give out completely. And he stood there, snow catching on his shoulders, realizing he wasn't just emotional, he was angry. Not at Emma, not at Lily, but at the system that let people fall through, cracks large enough to swallow, families whole. That night he didn't go home. He went to his office, the one with floor to ceiling, windows and 3 years of grief tucked inside every corner. And he started making calls. Not the polite calls, the midnight calls. The ones where his voice didn't carry corporate courtesy. It carried fire. "We're changing how we do things," he told HR. "I want an emergency. Caregiver program, health support options, paid leave. And I want it yesterday." He didn't know exactly how yet, didn't know how wide the program would grow. But he knew this much. Helping one little girl wasn't enough. The problem was bigger, and so the solution had to be bigger too. By morning, the office lights were still glowing, even though the sun had already climbed above the skyline, and Marcus looked like a man who had sprinted through the entire night on nothing but adrenaline and determination. His team gathered around the conference table, bleary-eyed but alert, because everyone knew that when Marcus Hale showed up with this much fire in his voice, something big was unfolding. "We're launching a new program," he said, sliding paperwork across the table. "Caregiver leave, medical emergency grants, flexible scheduling, on-site daycare partnerships. I don't care what hoops we need to jump through. We're doing this." His staff exchanged glances, surprised, impressed, unsure, but no one argued. Marcus wasn't asking. He was leading. Within a week, his company rolled out the pilot program quietly, without press, without the fake shine of corporate PR, just a genuine push to help families who were drowning under the weight of responsibility. Flyers went up in break rooms. Managers received training. HR hotlines were updated, and Marcus visited store after store, talking to employees directly, listening to the stories he'd never taken the time to hear before. Single moms sleeping in cars between shifts, dads working double nights to cover their kids' prescriptions, grandparents juggling part-time jobs while raising toddlers. Every story chipped at him, sharpened his resolve. One afternoon, he stopped by the small grocery branch on West Willow, the one closest to Emma's apartment, and found a cashier crying in the back room. Her daughter had been running a fever for days, and she'd been terrified to call out of work. "You can go," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Take care of your little girl. Your job is safe." She hugged him, not because he was her CEO, but because he was the first person to tell her she didn't have to choose between a paycheck and her child. That same week, Emma received a call from her manager offering her flexible hours and letting her know she'd been approved for caregiver leave. She stood in her tiny kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, staring at the peeling wallpaper like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. I didn't apply for anything, she said carefully. Someone put your name through, her manager replied. And before Emma could ask more, Lily tugged her sleeve, holding up Hope the teddy bear and whispering, Mommy, can we rest today? For once, Emma didn't have to say no. The next morning, a small box appeared at Emma's door. Inside, groceries, essentials, and a handwritten note that simply read, For better days, no signature, no company logo. But Emma knew. She pressed the note against her chest, tears catching at the corners of her eyes, realizing that somewhere out there, someone had decided her family mattered. Meanwhile, in a quiet office downtown, Marcus pinned a new drawing to his wall, a scribbled picture from an employee's child thanking him for the program. The drawing sat beside his late son's photo, and for the first time in years, the two didn't make his heart collapse. They made it steady, purposeful, ready. And as he leaned back, staring at the two pictures side by side, one from a past he couldn't change, and one from a future he could fight for, he knew something undeniable. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Something bigger had just begun. The crazy thing about change is that it usually sneaks up slow, like a crack in the sidewalk, or the quiet hum of a heater that finally kicks in after hours of cold. But every now and then, it hits all at once. Big. Loud, undeniable. And that's exactly what happened the morning Marcus walked into the company's main branch with snow still stuck in his hair and a fire in his chest that had only grown sharper since the day Lily asked if she could sit at his table. The pilot program he launched wasn't just running, it was exploding in the best possible way. Word had spread through every store break room, every back hallway, every employee group chat, single parents, finally getting time off to care for their kids without risking their jobs. Workers receiving emergency grants that kept them from eviction. Moms going to doctor appointments with real support behind them instead of fear. It wasn't perfect yet, not even close, but it was working. And the stories landing on Marcus's desk were not numbers anymore. They were voices, faces, families, human beings he couldn't ignore even if he tried. That afternoon, he decided to check in on a local store, the same one close to Emma's apartment. And what he walked into nearly stopped him in his tracks. The break room walls were covered in handwritten thank you notes, some from employees, some from their kids, some written in bright crayon with uneven letters, saying things like, thanks for helping my mommy, or my dad stayed home when I was sick. And right in the middle of that collage hung a small drawing taped crookedly to the whiteboard, a stick figure girl with a teddy bear in one hand and a big scarf wrapped around her neck. Underneath, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, Thank you, Scarf Man. He didn't need a name on it to know exactly who it came from. For a second, he had to look away, clearing his throat, rubbing a hand over his jaw as if emotion was something he could just wipe off, but he couldn't. Not this time. Not anymore. Later that evening, he drove to Emma's apartment with a couple boxes in the back seat. Nothing flashy, just some groceries, warm clothes for Lily, and a small care package put together by a few employees from the program team who insisted on helping. When he knocked, Emma opened the door with a confused smile that quickly softened into something warm, something tired but grateful, something that made Marcus realize just how badly life had worn her down and how deeply she deserved a break for once. You didn't have to come all the way over, she said quietly, stepping aside so he could enter the tiny living room, where Lily lay curled on the couch watching a cartoon about dancing snowmen. Lily perked up instantly, lifting Hope the teddy bear above her head like she was presenting a royal guest. Scarf Man, she squealed, and her voice was stronger today, not perfect. Not fully there, but steadier than before, like her little body had found a bit of peace in all the chaos. Marcus helped Emma unpack the boxes, and they talked, not like a CEO and an employee's mom, not like a stranger offering charity, but like two people sitting on the same side of a long fight. Emma told him about the bills she could finally catch up on, the shifts she could now take after Lily's treatments, instead of rushing from work to the hospital, with no breath in between. The nights she actually slept because she wasn't terrified of losing her job for taking care of her daughter. And when she asked him why he did all this, Marcus didn't give a polished speech or a corporate answer. He just said the most honest words he'd spoken in years. Because no parent should have to fight alone. And no company should pretend they can't do something about it. Emma's eyes glistened. With tears, she tried to blink away. But Marcus didn't call attention to it. He just handed her a tissue like it was the most natural thing in the world. And for once, she didn't apologize for needing the help. Weeks passed, snow melted, and spring crept in with those shy little patches of green that peek out between cracks in the pavement. And life began to settle into something that almost resembled peace for Emma and Lily. Treatments were still tough, clinic visits still long, but there were smiles now, real ones, the kind that carry relief and hope instead of fear and exhaustion. And every so often, Marcus would show up at the clinic, not with cameras or announcements or some big showy corporate gesture, but with a coloring book, a warm drink, or just a steady presence that made the hallways feel less overwhelming. The nurses knew him by name now, the way they know the parents who show up consistently, and even though he wasn't Lily's father, he showed up with the same devotion, quiet, consistent, unfailing. One afternoon, while Lily was resting after her infusion, Emma whispered, "You've done more for us in 2 months than most people have in years." Marcus didn't answer right away. He was staring through the window, watching a little boy drag an IV pole while laughing at a cartoon on a tablet. Then he finally said, "I'm just trying to be the man I should have been when my family needed me." But the change didn't stop with them. The caregiver initiative, the one Marcus launched in a single frustrated, determined night, wasn't a pilot anymore. It had grown into something bigger, something powerful. News outlets picked up on it after employees started posting online. A local reporter interviewed store workers, and suddenly, Marcus's company became the face of what corporate responsibility should look like. Not because he wanted credit, he ignored every interview request, but because stories of parents finally being allowed to care for their kids without risking. Evictions spread like wildfire. And the more it grew, the more Marcus realized this wasn't just a program. It was a movement. Something that could reshape entire communities if handled right. One bright morning, when the air was crisp and the streets smelled like fresh rain, Marcus invited Emma and Lily to the company headquarters for a small gathering. Nothing fancy, just employees, managers, and families who had benefited from the program. Lily walked through the glass doors wearing a tiny yellow dress and clutching, hope so tightly that her knuckles turned pink. Workers waved at her, some cheering softly, some smiling as if they were seeing the face of the very reason they felt less alone now. Emma stayed close behind her, taking in the building with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed but also proud. When Marcus stepped onto the small stage set up in the lobby, he didn't give a corporate speech full of buzzwords. He didn't pull out charts or numbers or any of that business language fluff. He simply placed a small drawing on the podium, the one Lily made, the one that said, "Thank you, Scarf Man," with a little stick figure smiling under a big blue scarf. And he told the room, "This is why we changed everything. Because sometimes the smallest voice in the room shows you the biggest problem you've been ignoring." People clapped. Some cried, some held their kids a little tighter. After the event, Lily tugged on his sleeve and handed him another drawing. This one showing 3 stick figures. Her, Emma, and Marcus, standing under a big sun with the words, "We're okay now," written in bright purple marker. Marcus felt his throat tighten, emotions stacking heavy and warm behind his ribs. He crouched down, taking her tiny hand in his, and said quietly, "You're more than okay, kiddo. You're strong, and you change more lives than you know." And as they all stepped outside into the warm afternoon light, as Lily skipped ahead and Emma walked beside him with a relieved smile she hadn't worn in years, Marcus realized something simple but profound. All of this, every change every family helped, every policy rewritten, started because one sick little girl looked up at a busy, broken man and asked the smallest, softest question in the world. "Can I sit here?" If this story touched your heart today, make sure to subscribe for more uplifting, soul-stirring stories that remind us just how far a single act of kindness can go.